Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into the incredibly rich history, the enduring culture, and, well, the deeply complex geopolitical struggles of the Karen people. Really, this is the story of a community whose roots trace back millennia. They've survived one of the longest-running civil conflicts in modern history, and yet they continue to preserve this vibrant, unmistakable cultural identity across a massive global diaspora. It's an amazing story.
Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to trace the remarkable journey of the Karen, starting way back with their ancient origins and migrations. Then, we'll look at their deeply held beliefs, examine the massive historical fracture caused by World War II, dive into the decades-long civil war that followed, and finally, we'll celebrate their incredible resilience today.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, Origins and Ancient Migrations.
So tracing the origins of the Karen is like putting together a giant historical puzzle. Over 2,000 years ago, which is just wild to think about, their ancestors started migrating south from Central Asia and Tibet. They traveled along the massive Salween and Irrawaddy river systems. And we actually have epigraphic evidence placing them in the region incredibly early. By the 8th century AD, groups identified as their ancestors, the Kakra, show up in Central Burmese inscriptions. Fast forward to the 12th century and you see the term Tongsu, meaning hill farmer, being recorded. By 1240 AD, the name Karang is explicitly carved into stone near the ancient pagan kingdom.
Now you might be wondering, what was that early journey actually like? Well, a super fascinating element of ancient Karen legend talks about the River of Running Sand. It describes a completely terrifying, treacherous trek their ancestors had to survive. Today, historians and linguists generally identify this river as either the shifting sand dunes of the Gobi Desert or maybe the heavily silted waters of the Upper Yellow River Basin in northern China. Either way, surviving that grueling journey is a foundational piece of Karen identity and folklore even today.
Okay, linguistics nerds, you are going to love this part. This history created a fascinating linguistic anomaly. You see, the Karenic languages are part of the broader Tibeto-Burman family, but while almost all of their linguistic cousins use a subject-object-verb sentence structure, the Karen use subject-verb-object. Why the flip? Well, as these highland tribes migrated, they had really intense prolonged contact with lowland Mon Khmer populations. They completely altered their sentence structure after learning wet rice cultivation from these neighbors. It's a perfect example of history and daily life permanently altering a language.
Moving right along to Section 2, Culture, Beliefs, and Traditions. Get this, the year is 2763. No, we haven't time traveled. That was the year in the Karen lunar calendar as of 2024. The Karen don't base their calendar on recent historical events. They count the years directly back to their original departure from that river of running sand in the Gobi Desert. Every single new year, which they celebrate at the end of the rice harvest, is an incredible testament to thousands of years of unbroken cultural memory.
So, remember that terrifying desert trek we just talked about? Legend has it that the fear and stress of that journey was so intense, it could actually cause a person's soul to leave their body, making them terribly ill. And to prevent that, the wrist-tying ceremony was born. Today, it's this deeply symbolic ritual meant to tie a frightened soul down to the body during times of stress, symbolizing unity and protection. The elders carefully wrap red and white threads around the wrists of the younger generation 3 times, tie it off, snip the excess, and then place that extra thread right on their head to keep the soul secure.
And there is profound meaning behind the specific items they use during this ceremony. It's not just random, right? When the younger generation accepts the thread, a bamboo tray is presented with 7 very specific items. You've got cold water for purity, the threads themselves for protection, rice balls for community closeness, and sticky rice folded into a triangle to represent intelligence. Plus, there are boiled bananas for family, the Paul Wee flowers symbolizing pure Karen identity, and sugarcane for personal growth. It's a rich, tangible representation of everything they value.
And that cultural pride, it's woven, literally woven, right into their everyday lives. Karen women are renowned for their incredibly fine cotton weaving, which is traditionally done on small backstrap looms right inside their homes. They use natural dyes to create these vibrant red, blue, and black tunics and sarongs, and they weave in specific historical patterns. Unmarried girls typically wear simple, beautiful white dresses, while married women wear these elaborately embroidered 2-part outfits.
Which brings us to a really tough turning point. Section 3, World War II Divisions.
Sadly, those peaceful agricultural traditions were violently disrupted by the geopolitical earthquake of World War II. In Burma, the war was largely fought along racial lines. Thousands of Karen fiercely supported the British allies. They formed guerrilla units like Force 136, fought behind enemy lines, and risked everything to shelter British soldiers. On the flip side, the Burman majority's nationalist forces initially allied with Imperial Japan, who had actually promised them national independence. So suddenly, you have the different ethnic groups of Burma fighting on completely opposite sides of a brutal global war.
To really understand the fallout here, listen to this quote from the Council of Kachin Elders in 1946. It captures the sentiments of ethnic minorities like the Kachin and the Karen immediately following the war. During the conflict, severe communal violence and retaliation had taken place. These words perfectly, and tragically, capture the deep ethnic tensions and profound feelings of betrayal that were simmering just as the British were preparing to leave Burma. Trust had been fundamentally broken.
And that tragic breakdown leads us to Section 4, the longest civil war. The breaking point finally hit in 1949. Before independence, there was a glimmer of hope. The Panglong Agreement was drafted, promising eventual autonomy and a federal structure for the ethnic minorities. But those guarantees were ultimately ignored. Following independence, after severe intercommunal violence erupted, including devastating attacks on Karen villages, the Karen National Union, or KNU, took up arms for independence. And that marked the beginning of an armed insurrection that, incredibly, continues in various forms today.
Now, to counter this insurgency, the central government employed a deeply controversial and honestly brutal counterinsurgency tactic known as the Four Cuts. The explicit goal was to separate the armed resistance from their civilian support base. Basically, the military systematically worked to cut off four essential things from the civilian population: food, funds, intelligence, and recruits. Historical records show this deliberate targeting of civilians caused immense, widespread suffering.
And the human toll over the last 70-plus years? It's absolutely staggering. International human rights organizations have documented widespread forced labor, massive land confiscation, and the systematic burning of villages. Hundreds of thousands of civilians have been displaced from their homes, and Karen State today suffers from a horrific proliferation of landmines. The sheer gravity of what the Karen people have endured is just heartbreaking.
But there is a profoundly inspiring final chapter here. Section 5. Resilience in the diaspora.
Despite decades of conflict, the Karen population remains incredibly strong, even though they're heavily displaced. When we talk about the numbers, there are still approximately 6 million Karen living in Myanmar. In neighboring Thailand, about 400,000 live in ancestral border villages, while over 140,000 are living as displaced persons in refugee camps. And what's really amazing is that since the mid-2000s, over 50,000 Karen refugees have been resettled globally in countries like the US, UK, Canada, and Australia. But here's the best part. Despite the trauma of war and all that vast geographic separation, the Karen actively keep their culture alive. Whether they're in a Thai refugee camp or a community center in Minnesota, they gather together. They share traditional meals like takar pa, a delicious soup made with bamboo shoots and white rice. They mourn together on Martyrs' Day, and Christian communities joyfully ring in the holidays with a celebration called Sweet December. Through shared food and community, their heritage remains completely unbroken.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final thought. Think back to that red and white thread from the wrist-tying ceremony. It was designed thousands of years ago to keep a frightened soul attached to its body during a harrowing desert migration. Today, how does a tradition as simple as tying a thread around a wrist continue to powerfully bind a globally scattered people together against all odds? It's an absolute testament to the incredible resilience of the Karen people. Thanks so much for watching, and keep seeking to understand the complex stories that shape our world.